Hello everyone, my name is Christian. I'm an architect, CG artist, and co-founder of Monarch Studio. Our main objective here at Monarch is to produce high-end images that inspire for unbuilt architectural projects. In today's video, we're going to produce an exterior daylight scene of a cottage, right from scratch, using the industry's most powerful software, which are 3ds Max and Chaos Corona. It is important to know that 3ds Max is the industry's standard to create high-end architectural images. Whether you want to join a recognized visualization studio or want to work as a freelancer, you will have to learn the software at some point. You can check out our links in the description to learn more about our available courses. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so to start off with, we're going to be needing a box as a starting point. So for this, I'm going to go into the Creation tab, and then I'm going to select this box. To go inside a viewport here in 3ds Max, we only have to press the Alt plus W keys. I also need to get rid of this grid, as it's going to be a little bit annoying as we go along. So for this, I'm going to press the G key. Now I'm going to just press and drag to create this box. And once I'm done creating this object, I'm going to right click. Also, let's make sure that we're not working with these edged faces, or default shading is preferable if we go into the clay mode. And to see the segments from this object right here, we only have to press the F4 key. Now let's change this viewport from a perspective one to an orthographic one, so we can be a little bit more precise when working. Now I'm going to change the parameters from this box, so let's go into the modifier tab while selecting this box, and let's change some of the parameters on it, and I'm going to be starting off with the height. So for the height of the cottage, we're going to be using 550 centimeters. And for its width, let's go for 800 centimeters. So it's going to have 8 meters in width. And finally, its length, it's going to be a little bit high, as we want to play a little bit with the facade of this to get more design into it. So let's go ahead and type in 4000. There we go. Now, because I want to edit this further, I'm going to have to turn this object into an edit poly. So for this, I'm going to right click, convert to edit poly. I also want to give more design to the roof, so I'm going to pick these two edges, and while I'm in the modifier tab, I'm going to collapse all of this until I get to the edit edges tab. I'll be hitting connect once and then just check. So as you can see, I've connected these two edges through a line, which I'm going to be using in order to create a sloped roof. Now let's press the W key and bring this all the way up here, like so. And because I'm going to be giving a specific design to this top part of the object, I'm going to detach it from the whole mesh. So for this, I'm going to press the 4 key to grab all of the faces, or you could go here into the selection tab. We have the polygon selection, which is another way of saying faces. And once we grab them, I'm going to go into the edit geometry tab and click on the detach option. I'm not going to detach it as element or clone. I only want to detach it as a separate object. So I'm going to hit OK. Now we will be giving this object, or the roof, a little bit of thickness. So I'm going to be using the modifier list for this to call in a shell modifier. So let's type in shell, like so. And this modifier is going to let us give more thickness to any object here in 3ds Max. So in this case, I want to use 20 centimeters. And once again, because I want to edit this further, I'm going to convert this to an edit poly. Now let's go into a front view. And what I'm going to do is select the vertices from both of these sides, and I'm going to be dragging them all the way down here. Next, I'm going to just pick the vertices from this side and drag them in the x-axis, and the same thing with this one. So we have to be careful not to go all the way over here, because we don't want to leave this gap. So what we want to do is just to get as close as possible to the edge of our walls, like so. Okay, now we have to do the same thing but in the other direction. So I'm going to be grabbing all of these vertices and dragging them out like this. The same thing with the back ones. There we go. Now it's time to give a little bit more design to our facade. So because I don't want to see the roof, I'm going to be isolating the walls. To isolate objects here in 3ds Max, I only need to press Alt plus Q. So the main essence to start building something here in 3ds Max is to cut the faces so that we can create more polygons to work with. So there are multiple ways of doing this. In this case, I'll be using the Connect tool alongside with the slice plane tool. Okay, now I have to connect these 4 edges in order to start creating more polygons to play with. So let's go inside our Edit Edges tab, and here we're going to find the Connect tool. Let's connect this 12 times, like so, and then while selecting these new edges, I'm going to press the Connect tool again, but this time I only want to connect them 2 times. And let's go now to a left side. I'm going to be bringing these 2 new edges up here, and with the 4 key, I'll be able to select the new faces that I've created. So these are going to be representing our windows. Let's just go ahead and pick something like this, and let's avoid actually the symmetry. So to unselect objects in 3ds Max, you only have to press the Alt key. Let's create something a bit more random, like so. We are only going to be selecting the polygons from this side, as this side over here, we're not going to be actually seeing it on our render. So while selecting these polygons, we're going to go inside Edit Geometry and detach them so that we can work on them separately. Let's select them and isolate them too, pressing Alt plus Q, and then let's press the 4 key in order to select all of these faces. Now to give a little bit more of detail, I'm going to right click and give them an inset. This inset has to be by polygon, and I'm going to change this value to 10 centimeters, like so. Next, I'm going to be extruding them. So let's right click and extrude them. And because I want this extrusion to go inside, I'll be putting a value of -10. Actually, we can go a little bit further with -15 centimeters. We're going to be pressing the check option again. And once again, I'm going to detach them to add a little bit more detail. Let's select the faces, Alt plus Q. And what I want to do now is just to create some window frames. Now let's go into our Edit Edges while selecting the top and bottom edges. Let's connect them, and I'm going to be connecting them once. Now right click, insert them once again, and this time it's only going to be 5 centimeters, and there we go. Let's detach them for the last time, and as you can see, we now have some faces that will represent our glass, and these other objects which are going to be our window frames. They actually need a little bit more thickness, so let's go into the modifier list and type in shell. In the outer amount, this time I only want them to have, let's go for 10 centimeters. Now I want to see all my objects again, so right click and unhide all. There we go. Now I want to create an axis. Okay, so I'll be selecting all of these faces along with the same faces from the other side. So to get this wireframe mode on, you have to press the F3 key. So let's select all of them like so. And again, as you may see, we have a little bit of a problem at the bottom, but we're going to be fixing it soon. Let's go inside our Edit Polygons now and create a bridge between these 2 polygons so that we have something like this. Now let's go ahead and fix the polygons at the bottom. So I'm going to select them with the 1 option, which is my vertices. If I go to selection, you can see that I'm selecting only the vertex, and I'm going to snap them to the bottom by hitting the S key. Now it's time to add a little bit more detail to the left face. So I'm going to select that with the 4 key, and let's go to Edit Geometry and detach it so that we can work with it individually. Make sure that you press the S again so that we can unselect these snaps. And now I'm going to isolate this by pressing the Alt plus Q key. This time I'm not going to be using our usual connect to start splitting this face, but I'm going to use our slice plane, which it can be found in the Edit Geometry tab. So for this I need to actually select the face, and now we have this slice plane available. I'm going to unhide all for the moment because I want to also make sure that we are using the same height that we've been using for our windows over here. So let's select the snaps by pressing S and make sure that inside here, if I right click and go into the options, make sure that you have the enable axis constraints on. And inside these snaps, you actually have the vertex, edge or segment, endpoint and midpoint turned on. So these are the ones that we're using right now. I'm going to go ahead and close this, and now once I've positioned the slice plane, I only need to press on this slice option. Now let's unselect this, and there we go. Alright, so in this side, I also want an axis, but it's going to be a small one. And to get the general dimensions of a door, I'm also going to be using a box. So click and drag, and inside the modifiers, we can find its parameters. Let's say that the height is going to be at 250 centimeters, and the width, let's leave it at 120 centimeters. Now let's go into a front view, and if you get lost like I have and want to go back quickly to your project, you only have to press the Z key. Now let's position this a little bit better, like so. And now I want to copy this object. So I'm going to press and hold the Shift key and move it on the X axis. Let's just press copy and OK. Now I'm going to change the width of this new object to 240 centimeters. So it's going to be a little bit bigger than this other axis right here. Now I'm going to use the connect option. So I'll be using these two edges, and let's go ahead into our edit edges tab and connect them 4 times. Let's press on this check button, and now I only want to select this edge right here and match it with the width of this box that is going to be our starting point to create these 2 voids that are going to be representing our axis. Notice that I'm using the snaps for this, and now I'm going to unselect them by pressing the S key once again. Now to create the height of these doors, I need to again select these edges right here and connect them once. So I'm going to right click and drag this one all the way to the top. Now let's select these 2 new polygons and extrude them by right clicking, extrude, and let's go to -20 centimeters this time. Once we've done with that, let's detach them like we've been doing. And to get more detail into this face, I'll be selecting these 2 edges. Let's go into our edit edges tab and connect them twice. Right, now I'm going to just smart extrude this. So the way that smart extrude works is that I only have to press and hold the Shift key and move this face on the Y axis. You know what's coming up. We have to detach this too, so that we can work on them properly. And Alt plus Q as always. And now let's add a little bit more of detail. So for this, I'll be pressing the 4 key in order to select the faces. Let's go into the edit polygons, and here we have the inset. But as you have may noticed, it's better and more efficient to right click and click on this inset option. I'm going to inset it 5 centimeters. And for this one, I want to add a little bit more of character. So let's connect these 2 twice so that we end up with these 2 faces, right click and inset. So if we don't change this from group option, which is right here, to polygon, we are going to be getting something that we don't really want. Okay, so I actually want to create 2 separate doors, and let's inset them by 5 centimeters this time. I also want to extrude them inwards. So if you notice at the bottom, we have the X, Y, and Z axis in centimeters, and as I move along in the Y axis, you can notice that I'm extruding this by 6 centimeters. Now the same thing with this one over here, 6 centimeters around will be enough. Now I need to detach this so that we end up with one object which is going to represent our window frames and the other one which is going to represent our glass. The same thing with this one at the top. Insert it 5 centimeters. Let's extrude this inwards and also detach it. Alright, so now I want to add more detail to these window frames. So Alt plus Q, and if I double click on these edges, I'm going to actually loop them. I can connect them, and then this time I'm going to connect them twice. By doing this, you can see that I end up with these faces at the center, which I can also loop them by double clicking. Now, smart extrude a little bit inwards like so, and we're going to be doing the same thing with this one. So connect them. Let's go and select the faces at the center, or at the midpoint, if you will, and finally this one too. So I'm just adding a little bit more detail to our window frames, or our door frames rather. Let's connect them twice and select them like so. Right click on hide all, and we end up with something like this. We're not going to be using these 2 objects anymore, so let's delete them. Alright, so we have this design on our facade. Now it's time to give a little bit more detail to the top part. So again, let's isolate this. And if you notice, we have a little bit of a problem here as we have these shades on our clay, right? And these are actually going to be appearing on our render, so we have to fix this. And in order to do this, we only need to apply a weighted normals modifier. So as you notice, the shadows are still there, so we have to get rid of them by going into the hard edge detection section. So I'm going to press by edge angle, and 30 should be enough. And there we go. Now let's go ahead and convert this again to an edit poly, and I'm going to be selecting these edges right here and connecting them. Let's connect them by quite a lot actually, and I don't really want to create any connections in the bottom part, so I'm going to just deselect them with my Alt key like so, and then connect them again. Let's create more of these details, maybe 40 of them, and click on that check option. Now I want to extract these new edges, so inside edit edges again we have the create shape from selection option. I don't want to have this object smooth, so let's go ahead and pick the linear option. And now if I unselect what I've been selecting, okay, so I was selecting the edges, so I just pressed number 2 on our keyboard, and now I can select everything else. So we have something like this. Now inside our rendering tab, if I enable this in render and viewport and now go to our rectangular option, I'll be changing this to 20 centimeters by 20 centimeters. So let's see how this looks in a clay mode by pressing F3 again. And you can see that I've created this additional detail, as easy as that. Now this roof seems like it's floating. Actually, if I go ahead and unhide all, it seems like it doesn't have anything to hold it. So let's go ahead and create another detail. So let's go ahead and loop all of this by double clicking. And I actually need to grab these additional polygons right here. And I'm going to be detaching them. So let's go ahead into the edit geometry, detach, and let's give a little bit more of thickness to this newly detached polygons by using the shell modifier. Now in the outer amount, I can go a little bit further with 20 centimeters. And in the bottom part, as you may notice, we have this kind of like problem here that it's actually tilting to the side. So we have to straighten those corners like so. So in the bottom part of this modifier, we have this option straighten corners. Now I'm going to right click, convert to edit poly again. And if I select the upper polygons of this new object, I'll be able to extrude them. So let's go ahead and press and hold the shift key and move it on the Z axis like this. All right, so now right click on hide all, and we have this extra detail there. It's a little bit too much. It's actually looking a bit weird. So let's Ctrl Z everything. Let's not extrude it that much, just a little bit. Now we're going to be adding a drainage system to this roof. And it's going to be a simple one. Let's go into the front view and let's go into the creation tab, now into the splines section, and pick the line tool. So this drainage system is going to be something like this. Obviously this is way too big, so let's go inside its modifiers, and I actually want to make it as a radial geometry and not rectangular, and the thickness, it can be around 6 centimeters. I'm also going to be increasing the sides, so let's go for 32. And also if I go into the vertex option here, I can start manipulating the curvature of this by going into geometry and applying a fillet option to this. I also need the same thing down here, so it looks a bit more natural, right? I see that this is a little bit too thin, so let's go to 10 centimeters. And now let's just copy this by holding the shift key. There we go, like so. All right, so now we're finished with this modeling section, or almost finished. So it's time to bring in a Corona camera. Let's go to the top view and inside our creations tab. And you can see that we still have a little bit of shadows there. We'll be seeing if the rendering catches that or not, because it's at the top part. So it's not going to be really noticeable. But anyway, so let's go inside the camera option, and here we have the Corona cam. I'm going to be placing it like so. So we grab the whole design and let's just move the camera closer. Notice that I have two different options here, the camera target and the actual camera. I just selected the camera, not the whole camera. If I wanted to select the whole thing, I only needed to press on the center like this. Alright, now to see what the camera is actually catching, let's go inside a different viewport while pressing Alt plus W, and now I'm going to press the C key. So we can actually see what the camera is catching right there. However, we have to change some settings here on our render setup. So inside the Command tab, we have the output size, which is actually going to be the resolution in which we are going to be rendering. Okay, so here by default, on the output size, we have a horizontal dimension, which is 1280 by 720, right? So this is fine because it's actually going to be uploaded to YouTube, which uses a horizontal resolution. Okay, so if we wanted to upload this to a social media, such as Instagram, we would need to change the height so that it's actually larger than the width. Okay, but we're going to be leaving this as it is. Now, to catch this aspect ratio on our camera, we need to press the Shift plus F keys. We also need to change some settings of the camera. So let's go into the Corona camera and select camera. Now let's go into its modifiers, and we're going to be changing the focal length first to something like 24 millimeters. A good focal length will be in between 17 and 25. It's going to be comfortable for the viewer if we use this kind of values. Now I see that I went too far from the architecture, so let's grab the camera like this. And I also want to put in some guides, such as the rule of thirds. So let's go into the standard tab and select the viewport configuration. Let's go into the save frames, and in here let's unlock these two, and in the horizontal dimensions I'm going to have 66.6, Ctrl C and Ctrl V in this vertical value here, and now let's just put in a 0 and a 0 right there. So with these values we're actually going to be applying a rule of thirds on our viewport. Let's go ahead and activate them by clicking on Action Save and Title Save. Let's hit that apply option and OK. Now I'm going to use the camera target. So let's select the camera and go ahead and select the camera target. And now I also want to select the camera again and put this value on the Z-axis at 120 centimeters so that we lower the height of the camera and we grab a better composition for this project. I'm also going to be selecting the camera target and placing this edge of my architecture so that it matches with the edge of our rule of thirds. Now let's go ahead again, select the camera because I want to fix the vertical tilt. So for this, let's go into the tilt and shift, and we're going to be activating the automatic vertical tilt. Okay, now let's change this to a clay mode and press F4. There is our architecture, and the next step that we have to do is to start creating a terrain. So let's go ahead into an orthographic view, and for this I'm going to be starting off with a plane, a simple plane like this, which will cover the view of my camera. Now into its modifiers and reset the length and width segments like so. Right click, convert this to an edit poly, and now what I want to do is to select both of these edges right here, go inside the edit edges and connect them, so that I create some kind of slope in this part and also a slope in this other part by connecting it once again. So we have this very subtle slope going on our terrain. Now to start manipulating them, I'm going to select the whole thing and go into the paint deformation tools. But before this, I need to actually create more polygons. So let's go inside the edit geometry, and here we have the mesh smooth. So what's going to happen is that it's going to multiply all of my polygons from this plane so that I can use it with my paint deformation. So now this paint deformation tool will actually have something to play with. So if we didn't create this much polygons, nothing would have happened. Now you can see that the brush size is too small. So let's go ahead and increase it to 200 centimeters so that we can start pulling up and creating a terrain for our design here. Okay, so because we're going to be needing a little bit more of detail on our foreground, which is the part that our camera is grabbing the most, we have to add more detail to this section right here. Okay, so let's add a little bit of irregularity as any other terrain would have in real life. So we have to follow that parameter, if you will, of real life. Okay, so it's going to be enough only to put it on the foreground. Okay, so if I go back to my camera, you can see that I've created this irregular terrain. Okay, so it doesn't matter if we don't use it much or if we don't deform much the back section of our plane, because it's not going to be very visible. Okay, so next up we have to bring in some light into the scene. So let's go into the material editor and make sure that you're using the slate material editor and not the compact material. So in here, inside modes, let's go into the slate material editor and let's bring in a Corona sky. So this is a built-in kind of like HDRI that Corona has, and we have to actually link it inside the render setup, specifically on the scene. Let's go all the way down here and activate single map. So this is where we have this scene environment. So it makes sense to link it here, right? Now, usually the intensity of this, it's at 1 and it's going to be too much. So let's lower it to 0.2. I'm also going to be copying this component because I want to use it as my background, and you're going to see how that works in a moment. All right, so we also need to configure the lighting, right? But if I start my interactive render right now, I would only get the materials that I can see in the default shading, which are really, really weird. So we have to change that in order to properly set our lighting. All right, so inside the render overrides, we have the material override. Let's select it and let's override all of these materials with a neutral one, which is going to be the Corona physical material. Now we're ready to start the interactive render, and I also want to lock this specific viewport as our default rendering viewport. So for this, I'm going to be locking it, and now let's start the interactive render. Okay, so we have something like this. It's looking pretty good. So what we need to do now is to start importing some 3D assets and also creating some materials. And because I don't want this video to be too long, I'm actually going to be using some ready-to-use materials from Quixel Bridge. So I'm going to launch my Quixel Bridge just by typing in bridge, and let's wait for it to launch. Okay, now that we have the Quixel Bridge open, let's go ahead into surfaces. And first of all, I want a material that's going to go into my terrain. So let's go into ground, the ground section right here. And we're actually going to be using two of them. Let's go to rocky ground. So once you've downloaded it, I'm going to press on this positive icon to export it. And all the way down here, we should see the forest floor. I'm also going to be importing it to my 3ds Max. Alright, so once we're back on our 3ds Max, we should have all of our materials ready. Let's right click, select, and select tree to separate them so that they're not overlapping like this. Alright, so now, first of all, I have to select our terrain. Now right click and assign material to selection. I also need to map it, as if I start my interactive render and before that I actually need to exclude the material override that has been applied to the whole scene. I need to exclude my terrain. So while selecting it, let's go ahead and press on this add icon, and now let's start the interactive render. Alright, so this looks very ugly. So let's select the plane and let's map it with the UVW map. Next, we need to change the values to 500 by 500. Alright, so something like this looks really good. Alright, so if you remember, we are using only the Corona sky, which is not going to be enough to produce a good lighting. Let's go into our orthographic viewport and let's add another source of light, which is going to be the Corona. So let's change these to photometric to Corona, and in here we have the Corona sun. So it's really easy to use the Corona sun. As you notice, it's like any other object here in 3ds Max. You only have to click and drag and then give its height. Now let's go back to our interactive render, and now we have this really sunny day exterior scene. And it's actually looking kind of blurry, and that's because inside performance we have the fast preview denoise during render option. Let's deactivate it. Alright, so the sun is actually too strong. So while selecting it, let's go inside its modifiers, and in here I'm going to change the intensity to 0.5. We're going to be leaving it like this while we start creating all of our other textures. Also, to add a little bit more of detail to the ground, I'll be creating a path that will point to the axis of our architecture. So in order to apply two different textures to a terrain, we need to select it, and inside the edit poly, so we can actually just hide the UVW map for the moment and select the faces. I'm going to select the polygons which will have this forest texture or material, and I'm going to be given them another material ID. So this is the way to go if you want to add 2 or 3 or maybe 5 materials to a single object. You have to work with the IDs. So we're actually going to be needing a multi-sub object component. Okay, because we only have 2 materials here, I'm going to change this number to 2 and press OK. And now for the material ID 1, I'll be using this rocky ground material, and for the forest ground, it's going to be material ID 2. So these same IDs have to match with the IDs from our plane. And if I go all the way down here inside the polygon material IDs tab, you can see that all of these polygons that are inside this plane right now have the ID of 1. So we have to select all of the polygons which we want only to have this forest ground surface. But it's a little bit hard for me to select them right now, right? So let's go up here and change this rectangular selection to a spray one. So if I start spraying, you can see that I have more liberty or more freedom of selection. So all of these polygons are actually going to be having this material for the forest ground. Okay, something like this. And if I go over here, pretty good. Now I'm going to change the selection to a rectangular selection, and by holding the control key, I'll be selecting all of these polygons like so. I only need to be careful where I have the camera angle, right? So something like this will do. These IDs of this specific polygons that I've selected are going to have the ID number 2, while the other ones are going to stay with the ID number 1 by default. So now I'm going to select this multi-sub and right click, assign material to selection, and apply the UVW mapping once again. Now let's check out that interactive rendering. For the moment, this is going to be enough. This is actually a little bit too much on the scaling, so I'm going to be reducing this to 300 by 300 centimeters. I also need the displacement to come up a little bit more because it looks too flat. So to fix this effect, I'll be going into the Corona physical material, and inside here we have the displacement. Let's type in -1 to 5 centimeters so that this doesn't look that flat. And the same thing to the ground material down here. So -5 to -5 will do. All right, and now we start to see something a bit more natural. And actually, let's go further with the displacement of this rocky ground, okay, so that it looks a bit more natural, right? We can reduce the displacement of the ground too. Let's keep trying out different values as it looks a little bit better, right? So -20 to 20 centimeters will look better. That's a little bit too much actually. -15 to 15 centimeters. Okay, so it doesn't look that weird. And we can reduce this to, or increase it to -8 centimeters to 8 centimeters. All right, so something like this will do. And we're going to be fixing this as we go along. But as this is going to end up with some vegetation on it, it's not really going to matter. All right, so for the next step, we need to apply a little bit more of detail to the facade of our architecture. So what I'm going to do is to grab these two faces, okay? And they're still as an edit poly, as you may notice. So let's just select all of the faces from the left side, like so, and detach them. So let's go ahead into the edit geometry section, detach, and hit that OK option. Now for the next step, I recommend you to save your file, as sometimes the following plugin that we're going to be using finds some kind of error on the surface. It's going to crash our 3ds Max. And we might get an error because we have this void right here, but nevertheless, let's try it. That plugin is the popular floor generator. Okay, so everything went well, that's good. Let's go inside the general section and shift this to 90 degrees on its direction. Now let's go into the board size, and you can see that these boards are actually too big. So what I'm going to do is to reduce its width to maybe, let's go for 15 centimeters. Okay. And on its offset, let's leave it as 15. Okay, so this looks pretty good, and it's just adding an extra detail to the facade by adding boards with the floor generator. Okay, it's mostly used to create floor patterns, as the name suggests, but we can also use them for facades. So let's unhide them all, and let's just go into our clay mode, and it's actually looking really good. Now let's go ahead and select this face, Alt+Q, and we're going to be doing the same thing. So how does the floor generator works? It basically needs a flat surface, so that's why I'm excluding these extrusions that are inwards. So I end up with this plain surface. Now let's go inside the edit geometry and detach it. And to be more efficient, I'm going to unhide all and copy this modifier that we've already set. Just select this one. Remember to save before applying, because sometimes we end up crashing our 3ds Max. This time the direction is in the other side, so let's reset that by just right clicking. Okay, let's give it one more interactive render to see how everything is looking, and it's looking pretty nice. Alright, so for the next step, we're actually going to be using more materials from Quixel. So let's bring a wooden texture. Let's go into surfaces and then wood, and in here we can go ahead and select a board. Maybe this veneer will do. I actually like this oak veneer, so let's download it. This yellow one also looks pretty good. Let's try both of these. Okay, so once downloaded, we only have to export it once again, and we are going to be having to change some parameters on this newly imported texture. So let's go into select and select tree, because it's going into our floor generator. So to avoid any repetitions, we have to change its gamma with the multi-map. It's actually called Corona multi-map, if I can write it correctly, Corona multi-map. And we also need a Corona UVW randomizer. So with these two components, we can actually avoid having any repetitions. And each of these boards are separate mesh elements. So we have to also tell it that we are actually working with a mesh element and not with instance. So let's deactivate instance. And because we're only going to be working with one texture, here on the item count, we're going to leave it as 1. So let's just link this one with this one. And finally to the base color. We are also going to be bringing in a Corona color correct, because I'm not actually going to be using this yellow color, so I'm going to change that with the Corona color correct. Okay, so we have to change also some parameters inside the Corona multi-map. I want the gamma random, which is actually going to tell that some of my boards from the floor generator will have a lighter tone to them, and this is going to be random for each one. So we create that randomness. Also, the mapping of each of one of these is going to be different from each other. Okay, the scale can be a little bit larger for some of them. There we go. And the color. Okay, so for the color, I actually want to change its temperature, and we can use 7500 here. Now this is better seen in the interactive render. So let's go ahead and apply this texture. And I repeat that we are only importing this very quickly from Quixel because we don't want to end up with a really long video. Now let's go ahead and type in a UVW map, and this time it's not a planar surface but actually has the topology of a box. So I'm going to start with 250 by 250 by 250, and we can see that the texture is vertical when our boards are horizontal. So that doesn't make any sense having that. So while holding the gizmo, selecting the gizmo, I can rotate this 90 degrees. Like so. Now the texture is following the board's direction. I also need to exclude this from my material override list. So let's go inside it and press that positive icon there. Alright, so it doesn't look that bad, but I'm looking for something a little bit more darker. So let's go inside the Corona color correct, which is the one that's gonna help us do that. I'm gonna reset the temperature value and let's go for something like 3500. Okay, 4000, that was a bit too much. And also the gamma, it's a bit too high. So let's reduce it to something 0.5 will do. And also the saturation. Saturation values are very sensitive. So let's go for a very low value. And finally, the tint, I'm looking for something a little bit more brownish. Okay. Let's go all the way up here. Okay, something like this will do. And I actually need a little bit more of gamma because it's too dark. Okay, we can actually play with 0.8. This is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and apply it to the second set of boards on our floor generators. So right click, apply material to selection. Nothing is happening because we have to exclude it from our overrides list. There we go. This one will actually need a mapping to it. So let's copy the one that we've already have right here. So right click, copy, and right click, paste. This time, as you can see, the texture is pointing upwards when it should be in a horizontal way. So let's rotate it too by selecting its gizmo. And there we go. So now let's go ahead and add a glass for our windows. So let's select all of our windows like so. And up here we have the group option. So let's group them. So each time that we want to change its material, we don't have to go back. The glass material, it's actually really easy to create. Let's go ahead and bring in a Corona physical material, and I'm going to change the default to glass. And in here in the index of refraction, we can leave it at 1.52. We also need to exclude these from our material override list and start the interactive rendering, and nothing is happening because we haven't applied the material yet. Okay, there we go. Okay, so for the rest of the materials that include the roof and this drainage and also the window frames, we're actually going to be using metal materials. And these ones are too easy to create. So let's grab a Corona physical material, and the difference between this glass one is that this one is a non-metal. So for this new one that we're going to be creating, we're going to have to tell it that it's going to be a metal material. And I want the color to be much darker. The roughness is going to control the reflection, the amount of reflection that we're going to be getting. So right now it has 75% roughness. If I go all the way down to, let's say 0.18, you can see that the material is way more reflective. So in this case, I'm actually going to be creating two of these. One is going to be for one section of a roof, and the other one is going to be for most of our details. So let's start with this one. Let's close everything up, and I'm going to apply one kind of metal to these details, which is going to be this one, and another one to the actual roof. So let's pick this one. Okay, let's select it first. There we go. Now inside the color, I want that the actual roof and not its details is going to be a bit brighter. So remember that we have to exclude them. So let's exclude these objects and start the interactive render. Alright, so we end up with something like this. And we can actually see that we have something weird going on in here. So let's stop the interactive render and see what this is about. Alt plus Q. And let's go into a right view. Okay, everything seems alright. Let's go inside a clay mode to see if we can catch any shadows there. Okay, let's select these and let's bring in a weighted normals, and by edge will do. Okay, yep, this one too. Let's bring the same weighted normals to our detail right there. So one thing that we have to be careful is with the reflectiveness. So in this time, the reflection was too much, so let's increase the roughness value, and we're going to be leaving this one at 75%. Okay, now let's unhide all and start our interactive render. Okay, this is looking pretty nice. Maybe let's get these darker, our actual roof. Let's go inside the color and let's make it 5. Actually, let's lower these colors of the details a little bit. And finally, I think our window frames look pretty good in this white tone. And right now what I want to do is just to create another metal material for our drainage. Close all of these, and with our control key we can select multiple. Let's go back to our material editor and assign material to selection. Now these ones are going to be way more bright, something like this. Don't forget that we have to exclude it, because if we don't exclude them, we're not going to be seeing anything. And if we deactivate the material override, we're going to be shocked by the colors that we're going to be seeing. So it's better to have them this way. All right, let's actually make them a little bit more reflective. All right, so it's looking pretty good. Maybe let's try and change the window frames a little bit. Okay, so let's select all of our window frames once again, and let's group them together. So group, let's go inside the render setup and again, exclude them. Okay, assign material to selection and start interactive rendering. All right, it looks better. Okay, so let's make it a little bit darker. Let's go inside its color. Let's try number 5 on them, and number 10 should do it. Okay, it's looking good. Now what I'm going to do, it's just to pick our object, our whole object, which is, and I actually forgot about these. Let's also apply the same material to them. And once again, let's go ahead and exclude them. I'm going to select the whole architecture like this, which is this shape right here. And I'm also going to be adding a wooden texture to it, which is the one that we already have. And it's actually all the way up here. Let's map it too. So UVW map. Let's use the box. And remember that we've been using these dimensions, 250 by 250. Okay, now it's time to deactivate our material override, because all of our objects have a material on them. So we can safely deactivate the material override. Now, for the last section of this video, we are going to be importing some vegetation. And the vegetation that we're going to be using is going to be from Quixel and also from Maxtree. So let's go into the 3D plants, and in here we have all of these nicely grouped together. So, and actually this shrub looks pretty good. I'm going to download these and also go into the grass section. So let's go into grass, and in here I'm going to go for this that I've already downloaded before. So let's import it to our 3ds Max. Let's go back to shrub and see if they've downloaded already. Okay, it's at 30% so far. So let's wait until we import these assets. And we're back. Now, these elements right here from the left side, I've got them from Quixel. Okay, so these are the shrubs that we were downloading, and this is the grass that we're going for. The object that's not from Quixel is this tree, and this kind of trees, you can find them on Maxtree. However, as you can see, it doesn't have any textures on them because I have to import them. So how do we import it? We have to press the Shift plus T key. And by doing this, we have the asset tracking. And you can see all of these missing textures that are from our tree. So when you have downloaded an asset from Maxtree, you're going to have a separate folder with all the textures. The only thing that we have to do here is to find them. So I'm going to click once on the top one, and then while holding Shift key, I'm going to press the bottom one. Now right click and set path. So we're only going to be searching for the file that has these textures. Let's click once, and then we have to click on these 3 dots right here. And here we go. These are the textures. As you can see, it's the volume 35 from Maxtree, and I'm just going to tell it to use this path where all the textures are. I'm gonna hit OK, and we're just gonna wait for a few seconds, and there we go. Now we have all of the textures as OK. Now let's close this, and as you can notice, this tree now has the textures on it. So how do we start distributing the vegetation on our model? We're going to be needing the chaos scatter, that if we go into the standard primitives and then click here, we find the chaos scatter option. Let's use this, right click, it works as any other object, just click and drag. And now on its modifiers, we see this option called distribute on target objects. So I'm going to click on this positive icon. I'm telling it that I want the vegetation to be distributed on all of this plane right here, and then I'm going to be selecting which objects are going to go there. So for the moment, I'm only going to be distributing our grass, and these are going to be presented to us as proxies, and they're actually facing the wrong way, so they're like in a vertical way instead of horizontal. So this happens because the models that we bring from Quixel were usually made on another software. So we only have to go into the utilities while selecting the object and reset its X form. Now click on reset selected, and as you can see, all of them are now facing the correct direction. They're now horizontal. Also, I don't want the grass to be on this rocky ground, so we're going to have to tell the chaos scatter that that region is not going to have any grass on it. So to do this, I'm only going to be creating a shape out of the splines, which will cover all of these rocky area. Now I'm going to go to its modifiers, and on the rendering, I'm going to disable the enable in renderer and in viewport, so that we end up just with a line. Now I'm going to go ahead and select the chaos scatter, and all the way down here, let's actually collapse all of these. And inside the areas, it says spline excludes. So I'm going to exclude them using this region that I've just created. Now let's start the interactive render to see how that one looks. Okay, so we have something like this. We need to increase by a lot the number of 3D models that are being distributed. So inside our chaos scatter, let's go into the surface scattering, and here in the count, I'm going to go all the way to 250,000. All right, obviously this is way too much. Let's go ahead and type in 50,000. And there we go. This looks much better. However, we need a little bit of randomness to it, because all of the 3D models of grass that we have the same size, and that doesn't happen in real life. So let's go into the transformations tab, and all the way here we have this scale. We're going to tell it that some of these are going to have 80% of their original scale and some of them 120%. And actually, let's go lower. Let's go to 60 to 100. And there we go. Now we need to be careful, because inside our material, we told it that we want the displacement to go from negative 10 centimeters. So that's why some of the grass seems to be floating. So inside our transformation, and specifically on the translation, we have to tell it that the grass is going to go to negative 10 centimeters to negative 10 centimeters. So none of them are actually floating. However, we do need to increase the number of grass now, because it looks a bit weird. And actually, we can go to -7 to -7 centimeters. And there we go. And now let's go back to the surface scattering tab. Let's go ahead with 100,000. Okay, we can actually leave this as it is. It looks pretty good. Now let's go ahead and distribute our trees. Let's stop this interactive rendering and go to a top view, and inside splines we have the rectangle. Now I'm not going to be distributing our vegetation on a surface, but actually on a spline. I'm going to create a rectangle in the left side and another one at the back side. Now I'm going to create another chaos scatter. So let's select this and let's go inside its modifiers, and in the object section I'm going to select both of these rectangles, and the instance model is going to be our tree. As you can see, there are many proxies there, so we actually need to reduce the count to around 200 will do. And now we don't want these to be floating, so we actually need to lower them. There we go. Now it's time to start our interactive render to see how this one looks. It's looking pretty good. However, the trees are floating. So we need to grab all of our rectangles and lower them. So let's stop this interactive render, and we can turn this into an edit spline so that we can edit it further. I can lower the vertices from this side, and I'm actually going to be selecting all of the trees back here and lowering them a little bit more. Let's try that again. And also inside our chaos scatter, we are going to be needing to use some more randomness. So inside the transformations section, the scale from these trees are going to vary from 80% to 120%. Now let's start that interactive render again. And there we go. It looks much better. I also want some vegetation to happen in the foreground so that I can get some interesting shadows. Let's copy the original tree by holding the shift key and copy it. And now I'm only going to manually be bringing it to the foreground. I'm going to copy this once more and let's see how this one looks. It's very important for us to add elements on the foreground. This will create some more depth to our image. This is a little bit too close actually. Let's stop this and let's bring this a little bit to the top there. And I don't want it to be that noticeable. Okay, this is looking pretty good. I can also add a tree over here closer to our architecture there to create more depth to the scene. Okay, let's bring another one to the back. Make sure to rotate it and scale it differently so that we don't end up with something that's not random. There we go. I still have this reflection on the right side, which is looking a bit weird. So let's stop this rendering. So to fix this, I'm going to create another glass material, but this time it's not going to be as refractive. And I'm also going to be applying it only to the polygons that are being affected. So let's ungroup it. I'm going to select it and let's go into the material editor and apply this new material here. Let's change this to glass, and inside the index of refraction, I'm only going to be using 1.1. Right click and assign material to selection. Now let's check that problem again. Okay, let's select the one at the top too and apply the same material. And also we can increase the index of refraction a bit. So let's go for 0.3. And for the guys at the left side, let's pick the material with this eyedropper. There we go. Okay, so that's looking way better. Now to wrap this up, I'm going to go into the tone mapping, and here, without going into Photoshop, I can start applying some post-production. So first of all, let's increase the contrast. Let's go for a contrast of 2. To bring all of the colors together, I can desaturate the image a little bit with negative 0.1. That's a bit too much. Let's go for negative 0.07. 0.04 will do the trick. I can also add an LUT, so let's go into this positive icon and bring an LUT. Let's activate it and let's actually reduce its opacity because the contrast is too much and it's actually burning the whole image. Let's leave the opacity at 0.3. Another parameter that we can play with is the sharpening, and we can increase the sharpening to A3. For the sky, I would want it to have more contrast. So in here, we can duplicate this and let's go into the scene. And here we have the direct visibility override. This is going to override all of our background objects, which in this case is only our sky. So let's start the interactive render and we can lower the intensity from our Corona sky without losing our overall lighting. 0.05. That's too much, doesn't look natural at all. So let's try 0.1 will do. So there we have a little bit more of contrast. We can also enable the clouds here and play a little bit with them. So we can increase the amount to, let's say 1, or we can go with something a little bit more subtle, 0.03, 3 for the moment. So we can play a lot with this new parameter that Corona 9 has. We can also start adding more detail with our shrubs that we brought from Quixel, but this will do for the moment. Thank you so much for your attention. I'll see you on another video.